Good to see you. Let's go ahead and get started. So let me pull up the prayers and we'll begin with the recitation of the Heart Sutra. Tonight I'll actually comment on just a little bit of the Heart Sutra, that very famous phrase of form is empty, emptiness is form. But anyway, let's just try to bring to mind the teachings on emptiness that we've had as we recite these words together. Om, I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvati Putra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Kayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharad Vadiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. And we'll skip over this first prayer. We'll do the short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Refuge in Bodhicitta, first in English, then 2 more times in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodong soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chanyen gi pe sonam gi, dola penjir sangye ruparsho. Sangye chodong soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, Daki chanyan gi pe sanam gi, dola panchir sangye druparsho. Right, as usual, we'll do a short meditation now. Let's give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit by meditating on the breath. Again, choose whatever way you prefer to work with the breath. And whenever the mind wanders from the breath, just gently guide it back to the breath. And I'll come in just a few minutes and lead you in a short reflection so we can set our motivation together for tonight's session. Now let's set our motivation for tonight. And frequently I begin these motivations with rejoicing, with really thinking about the amazing opportunity that we have right now in our hands, having met with the Dharma in this life, and not just the Dharma in general, but specifically the Mahayana Dharma, the Dharma that teaches the entire path to complete enlightenment rather than merely to liberation or some other worldly goal. And within the Mahayana, we've met with the perfect teachings of the middle way that we're exploring in this module. And more specifically, the consequence middle way school that most correctly identifies the truth that the Buddha taught in the second wheel turning in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. We've met with qualified teachers who can help us to understand this middle way. His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Kyabje Zopa Rinpoche, other teachers of this tradition who are helping us in our understanding of this profound topic. So we're in a very unique position compared to most of the humans in this world. Many of them are completely unaware of the Dharma, and of course then are unaware of all of the great teachings the Buddha gave that can lead us to complete freedom from this prison of cyclic existence, but moreover, lead us to the fulfillment of our own potential, our Buddha nature. Each of us can become a Buddha. But we've met with teachings that allow us to have that knowledge, that awareness. So there's a certain responsibility that comes with that. Because we have this good fortune and this amazing opportunity right now, we need to use it for the greatest possible good, to help all sentient beings to achieve the fulfillment of their potential as well. And then the recognition that to do this, we have to become enlightened ourselves. If we don't attain that state, we will still be somewhat limited in what we can do for others. Because we care so deeply about their welfare, we want to work on our own understanding, our own skills, our own qualities, so we can eventually become a Buddha and then guide each and every being into that same state. So hold that motivation of bodhicitta, that wish for enlightenment of oneself, or therefore the enlightenment of all beings that will follow from that. And you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. Okay, so in the last class, I was working with presenting the 4-point analysis, this analysis that's primarily used as a reflection or an investigation into the I, the self that we identify with so deeply that we hold these mistaken views around. Remember, we spoke about how we have two different selves that we are working with, the self that is the person that exists, and we'll talk about this a little bit tonight in terms of the two truths. But then we also have the self that we are refuting, the mistaken sense of a self that we have with regard to this I, as well as with regard to all phenomena. So therefore, we can talk even about a selflessness of the I and the selflessness of other phenomena. And within the selflessness of the I, we would also include of any persons. So persons and phenomena is just a way of parsing up the entire world, everything that exists, and recognizing that we begin with this investigation into the person, quite specifically, again, the I that we are grasping to so tightly. So I do want to share just kind of a recap of that, just like I did with regard to dependent arising in last week's class. So the 4-point analysis begins with identifying the object of negation. And this is that sense of self, that false sense of self that is in the term selflessness, that we think that we exist kind of concretely, inherently, independently, intrinsically, We need to bring that sense of self to mind. And they suggest that you think about times when you've had a strong connection with that self, when you've defended yourself in the face of being wrongly accused or what have you, or even had very positive experiences, but the sense of self rose up quite a bit in terms of perhaps our feelings of pride about what we've accomplished or what have you. Once we do that first step, they actually say that's the crucial one. Then the remaining steps are actually quite easy. If we look at the second step, it's determining the possibilities. If we recognize that the basis for the person, the I, is the body and the mind, or as the Buddha often calls them, the five aggregates, the aggregate of form, which is our body, and then the other four feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and consciousnesses, that these constitute what we mean by mind. Well, then we have kind of two main groupings of the body and the mind that we need to kind of investigate to see if the sense of self is there. That's the main one that we are probably going to be, potentially finding this real I to exist in or among. But we have to also decide that there's a possibility that it is completely different from those, separate from the mind and body. We say that it's either the same as the mind and body or some element within the mind body complex or completely different from. Again, we've created what's called a dichotomy. There's nothing else that can be kind of posited. If it's not here and not, if it's here and not here, then we have kind of two options. It's either going to be here with this collection of stuff or it's completely apart from it. Could we find a sense of an I that is a third possibility? Again, we can investigate it, but it doesn't seem to be the case. The third and the fourth step are looking at those two possibilities. Again, the third step, put it back up on the screen, is analyzing oneness, sameness. And by oneness, we're not talking about just so that's in a very casual or conventional way. We're talking about, again, we've identified the object of negation in the first step. We are looking for something then that is able to set itself up as exactly some element within the mind-body complex or the collection of the mind and the body or what have you. So we're looking for something that is completely identical and the same as that sense of self, that sense of person that we are clinging to. So that's not, we're looking for something quite specific. We are not trying to negate mere existence. We're trying to negate some element of things existing from their own side. Here, the I that seems to be here somewhere in this collection of stuff, inherently here, independently here. And you go through the investigation, or you can again talk about the various consequences if that were the case. We went through that briefly. Then the fourth step in this is the other possibility, the possibility of difference. And by difference here, we don't mean just conventional difference, because as I have explained before, I and the aggregates are two different phenomena, actually. So they are different, but only merely different, conventionally different. We're looking for something that is inherently different, completely different than the mind and body. So if it were something completely different, well, then it would have to be different in all ways, and it would be something that is completely removed from the mind and body, shares no characteristics with the mind and body. And if we investigate in that way, we find that through the third and the fourth step, we essentially don't find anything that meets the criteria for being that inherently existent I. Having done that quest and going back to the second step and recognizing that those are the only two possibilities, then we have denied the existence of the object of negation. We have come to see that the inherently existent I cannot exist, because it cannot be found to be one with or the same as the aggregates, or completely and utterly different from the aggregates. So any questions on that analysis or on your working with that analysis? Could emphasize, actually, I don't know that I went through in the slides everything pertaining to the end of it where we said coming to a conclusion. But again, you get to this extended analysis, as His Holiness says, you get to a decision from within your own mind that this sort of I really does not exist. Again, I don't remember exactly where I ended last time, but let's just cover these as a way of wrapping up our discussion of this. He says then, by meditating and gradually cultivating these four steps, you will develop an ability to examine anything and everything this way, seeing the conflict between appearance and reality. And this is what we're going to be going into to a large degree tonight, is the consequences of this in terms of delineating phenomena in terms of appearance versus reality, and deciding from the depths that persons and things do not exist the way they appear. And we'll be going into that in more detail tonight. What is understood, His Holiness says, by that completely decisive mind is the absence of the inherently existent I. Even though you used to believe in it so strongly, you totally understand the negation of inherent existence. Your mind becomes absorbed in that emptiness. That's, again, the goal, is to get to a place where we can single-pointedly focus on that absence. It sounds strange to focus on an absence, but nonetheless, I mean, I've used this example last week. If you couldn't find your keys, you went to the place where you normally throw your keys when you get home, and your keys were not there. So they're not in the place where you normally think they are. You look through your whole house and you find an absence of keys anywhere in your house. Well, that's going to be a pretty prominent thought in your mind for a while until you find your keys, right? The absence of your keys. It's going to drive you a bit crazy, perhaps, trying to figure out, where could I possibly have left my keys? So we do have things that we refer to in our daily life that are absences, that are negations. This is just working on a very specific form of a negation. It is the most profound thing that we need to negate, which again is that false clinging, false self that we're clinging to, particularly again with regard to this I. So let me go back to it and just finish this off. I don't think there's too much left to the slides from last week that I may not have gotten to. Oh, there's just this little note, and this is again on pages 154 through 155 is a real concise meditative reflection. I even alluded to that briefly last week. That's kind of at the tail end. What we went through in the slides was kind of the individual sort of pieces and the reflections that they put in there. I do really like that about this book, How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And Jeffrey Hopkins aided His Holiness the Dalai Lama in doing a couple of other books that are very similar in terms of having these kind of meditative reflections that you can do at various points. So you're certainly welcome to use those in your meditation. So again, one last call. Any questions or comments on the 4-point analysis? You can certainly ask again later, but want to kind of move on to new material then, if there aren't any. I don't see any hands up online, so I think we will carry on then. So let's go back to the slides and we'll go into what we're going to cover tonight. The 4 topics that I want to touch on tonight are all kind of interrelated. This in general is called examining how persons and things actually exist and understanding what have come to be known as the 2 truths. The very first of these topics is kind of based on the main part of the reading that we're doing this week from His Holiness's book, Viewing Yourself as Like an Illusion. We'll talk about the importance of those words, like an illusion, not viewing yourself as illusory or as a dream or whatever the case might be, but as like an illusion. Then again, another part of His Holiness's the 2 chapters that were advised for tonight, noticing how everything depends on thought, which kind of takes us back around to the teachings on dependent arising, but applies them within the context of understanding emptiness on the basis of that previous analysis. I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 topics that aren't really mentioned in His Holiness's book, karma and emptiness. At least I don't recall seeing a very detailed explanation of that. But karma does inform things on the basis of emptiness, and it's important to talk about that a little, just so we have an awareness of the role that karma plays then in what we experience. If things are empty from their own side, well, what dictates why we experience particular things as what they are experienced as? If there's nothing inherent from the object, where does that come from? And the 4th topic, of course, the 2 truths, which is a pretty profound topic and one that you could, go on to for a whole weekend if you wanted to, but we're just going to touch briefly on those and talk a little bit about the Heart Sutra there. So the very first one, viewing yourself as like an illusion. To view yourself or other phenomena as like illusions requires two things: the false appearance of objects as inherently existent, and an understanding that you, or whatever you are considering, does not exist that way. This is something, again, I have touched on before. This isn't a brand new topic in a sense. But remember that when we were talking about how the steps that we go into in terms of getting into trouble that Rinpoche set out in his book, Virtue and Reality, where he says that essentially first something appears to us that we then impute a name to. Of course, and this is that very first step. And if we, as I mentioned previously, if we stop there, we wouldn't have any problems. Of course, we would have had to have stopped there a long time ago to not have any problems. But the idea is that that is a level of truth. And we're going to get into that later tonight. We are simply designating something on the basis of the conventional awareness that we've all decided in terms of labeling it, the words we give to designate it, and so on. So again, when we talk about something like a book, well, then we all had something like this appear to us with, the covers and the pages and what have you. Maybe it was initially a children's book. Maybe could have even been made out of fabric rather than paper. They have those for children as well. But we saw something that appeared to us, and we were taught the name book. We were taught what the concept of it was by our parents showing us the function of book and how, books are meant to contain pictures and information, and we open them up and we read them with our eyes and so on, all of this that we learned about this. The second step was that due to the force of our ignorance and these imprints of ignorance, the book appears to be real from its own side. It seems to have its own reality, establishing itself. Again, we're going to get into this a bit more tonight in these teachings, going through some of what His Holiness and Jeffrey Hopkins put together in the book. But the idea is that false appearance is part of the problem, because once things appear to exist out here on their own from the side of this that I'm holding in my hands, then we're set up for the third step, which is to assent to that, to agree to that. Now, the teachings on emptiness and the analyses that we've already done are to show us that the way things appear as if they had their own identity and established from their own side by way of that is false, that is not in accord with how they appear. That is the teachings that we come to, the conclusion we come to is that things are empty of that way of existing. What was said in that one little coming to a conclusion passage I read just a short while ago is that we can use the 4-point analysis with regard to anything, such as a book. We have to get real clear in our minds the first step, how the book appears. It appears and is clung to by our minds, in terms of the grasping mind of ignorance, as if it has its own reality, as if it's completely independent out here as book. Its bookness is solely established from the basis that I'm holding in my hands. Bookness seems to be out here on this basis. Then, of course, we go, well, what are the possibilities? If book really existed inherently in this, or it existed inherently, stop there. It would have to be either one with what I'm holding in my hand or some part of what I'm holding in my hand, or it would have to be utterly different. The inherent book would have to be something completely apart from that. Again, that's not that common for us to think about that, but we have to include that possibility because that will allow us to eliminate any possibility that book exists inherently. It's going to be either the same as, one with what I'm holding in my hand, or completely apart and different. And you do the same type of analysis. And if you look at even just the way that we talk about parts of a book, well, parts of a book, where is the book then? I mean, if this is the front cover of a book and the dust jacket of a book and the pages of a book, well, where's the book that they are a part of? We say, well, that's the whole thing. Well, but the whole thing consists of many different parts, right? And if it was the whole thing, it would have a unitary, identity. When we go looking for the inherently existent book that seems to be one, it has a oneness to it. Well, then we have to find a oneness that is equivalent to that inherently existent book. Do we find a oneness here? No, we find something that is a collection of many different parts. The basis of book has infinite parts to it. Do we have then infinite books in my hand? Well, no, we still have a unitary book, but it doesn't exist inherently. It cannot exist inherently, or there would have to be a unitary phenomenon in my hand. So again, we're getting to this idea that things do not exist in the way that they appear. They appear to have a self-established, unitary, existent identity from the side of the base, from their characteristics and so on. But that doesn't exist at all. How things exist and how they appear are two different things. This gets into the illusory nature of things. Things are like an illusion. It's not an illusion. It's not like, row, row, row your boat. Life is just a dream. Life isn't just a dream. Life is like a dream. Life is like an illusion. Life is like a mirage, a reflection, all these things that the Buddha used. But things do exist. They exist, but in a very, very subtle way, as we've already seen with some of our investigation in this module. Okay? So again, you would go on to the fourth step, which is to negate that the book could be completely different from these parts of a book that I'm holding in my hand, that there's some bookness that exists on its own independently. And we see that that's kind of absurd. So we can't really call that an option. And then we can refute that there is any inherently existent book. So when you get to that place, again, we have kind of two elements going on. There is a false appearance, which is kind of like what an illusion or a dream or any of these other phenomena are, and an understanding that what we are considering doesn't exist that way. This is what makes it like an illusion, right? Or like a dream. Because of your experience in meditation of searching for and not finding this independent quality, although after meditation phenomena still appear to exist inherently, the power of your previous understanding opens the way for you to recognize that these phenomena are illusory, in that although they appear to exist inherently, they do not. We have to kind of keep working with that. They do say that even when you get to the place of having this very profound realization of emptiness, we haven't talked about that maybe quite so much in our teaching so far on emptiness. But if we go back to the Heart Sutra and what Avalokiteshvara was realizing and so on, when you get into this meditative state where you are single-pointedly focused on emptiness, having analyzed for emptiness repeatedly, and gotten to a conceptual understanding of it and so on, you eventually get to a place through your meditation where the kind of idea of emptiness that is there conceptually falls away and your mind and emptiness merge. They call it, the phrase they use is, it's like water poured into water. Well, if you had water poured into water, well, then you're never going to be able to distinguish what water is which, right? The sense of an objective emptiness that is known and the subjective awareness knowing it, that distinction is gone. You have this very profound experience that begins your removal of everything that's obscuring your mind in a more kind of lasting way. We can diminish some of that through our previous meditation, but we can't actually get rid of it until we have that direct realization. That's when you become an Arya, a superior being, someone who has that insight like Arya Avalokiteshvara, who has that wisdom realizing emptiness at that level. They say for even those beings that have that meditation and that experience, when they come off their cushion after that meditation finishes, they no longer have the direct awareness kind of manifest in the mind, and everything still appears as if it's real. But of course, if you've had that experience, you know that things don't exist in the way that they appear. Prior to that, you will have convinced yourself through your meditation on emptiness that things aren't the way they appear. But until you have that direct realization, you really don't get the very subtle way that things actually exist and the complete contradiction of that false appearance. And by the way, they say that that continues. We go through a series of these realizations of emptiness that keep removing layer and layer of garbage from our minds. And eventually you get to a point where you are crossing over into Buddhahood. Until that time, you kind of go back and forth between realizing emptiness directly in meditation and then coming out of meditation and everything appearing to be so real again. But of course, every time that happens, you don't have any belief in it. Going back to the dream analogy that I've used previously, it's like a lucid dreamer who is always aware that what is appearing isn't real, even though the appearances still keep happening. Every time they go into a dream state, things appear to be real, but they have zero conviction in the reality of those things. Would be similar for these bodhisattvas who come out of their meditative experience and then everything appears to be real, but they know without a doubt that things don't exist that way. So we're kind of getting a flavor of that tonight in talking about kind of the understandings that people come to after. Again, you can get to it to some degree through your meditation while it's still conceptual, but it's going to be even more profound, they say. Again, I don't have this realization. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to infer that at all. They say when you get to the other side, when you kind of have had that direct realization, you become this superior being, this Arya being. You then have unbelievable wisdom of this reality, things not existing in the way that they appear. You know exactly how they exist. You know what they lack. You know that what is appearing to you is completely false. So this is what makes it kind of, again, like an illusion. It's illusory in nature. As Buddha said, all things have the attribute of falsity, deceptiveness. The eyes of those attending a magic show, which is one that is used very frequently in Buddhism, and in Madhyamika Buddhism for that matter, are affected by the magician's tricks. And through this deception, the audience thinks it sees horses, elephants, and so forth. The example that's used, and I've never had the experience of something like this, but I guess all magicians do something that is about some sort of getting people to see something that they thought they saw or not see what you don't want them to see, whatever. In this case, these Indian magicians apparently would take something like a stick and a stone, and they would cast a spell on the audience's eyes so that they would all see a horse and an elephant where there was previously a stick and a stone. And they would all buy into the reality of this and perhaps even get quite frightened. Because, elephants can be quite frightening creatures. They demolish villages in India, and other places all the time, right? So again, this is something that is speaking to the fact that there is this illusion that can be conjured up that is so believable, but it doesn't exist that way at all. The magician might still be under some of the spell because perhaps, through casting the spell on other people is still under succumbing to it. The magician is kind of like the person I was just describing who's had that direct realization, who knows that the way that this horse and elephant are appearing, it doesn't exist that way at all. It's an illusion that the magician created through the force of various factors. Then, of course, they say you could have someone who walks into the room who, after the spell has been cast so that their eyes weren't affected, and all that they see is the stick and the stone there. They don't see any of the illusion. That's kind of like a Buddha. And I don't get into all the detailed description of all the elements of this analogy. Most important thing is to understand that this is the way things are appearing to us in an illusory manner. It's like we've been believing in the horses and the elephants and everything existing out there from its own side, that it's hard for us to see that reality, that things aren't existing that way. That's what the reasoning on emptiness helps us to cut through, to eventually get to a place where we can see that things aren't existing that way. They are empty of that, and yet they still appear. There's, again, an appearance and reality. Things still will appear to us, but we have to see them for how they actually exist. Okay, so continuing with this, he says, I'm sorry, I wanted to put on a few of these just in this slide of things that are very commonly used, a reflection of a face in a mirror, besides that magician's illusion. The first time that you saw a reflection, perhaps it was a bit unnerving. We've gotten so used to seeing reflections, right, that we don't ever think it's a real face, but there still might be instances where something happens, right? Maybe you go to some hotels have a lot of like mirrored walls and stuff and things, and you kind of like you might walk into the room at night and the way it's reflecting, it might be you coming in the room, but you think it's another person because of various things. I don't know. So we do have times when perhaps we see a reflection as maybe being a real person or a real face, but it's only a reflection. A mirage, we all know this from living here in New Mexico, where if you're driving on the summer in some of the flatter parts of New Mexico, you might see what appears to be water based on the sun bearing down on the asphalt. and this is not actually water. A mirage exists, but a mirage as water does not exist. It appears to be water, but it isn't water. And then, of course, a dream. I've talked about this previously, so I won't belabor that point. The Buddha used this very frequently as a analogy for the way that things appear to be real and yet are not real in that way at all. So, in a similar way to all of these, an illusion and so on, by going along with the appearance of inherent existence, we exaggerate the status of good and bad phenomena and are thereby led into desire and hatred and actions accumulating karma. Remember that tree of samsara. The root is our clinging to this false appearance, belief in inherent existence, and we exaggerate good and bad. And so on. We go after the good with a mind of desire, want to repulse the bad, get it out of our lives with a mind of hatred, and we accumulate actions on the basis of that, and that keeps us within this state of cyclic existence. Continues, he says, what is not an inherently existent I appears to be an inherently existent I, and we accept the appearance as given. Again, these are all concepts we've talked about. We're just putting it together in this idea of the illusory nature of things and their reality. Seeing people and things as existing like illusions helps reduce unfavorable emotions because lust, hatred, and so forth stem from our superimposing qualities, good or bad, on phenomena beyond what they actually have. I find this interesting. I might need to spend a little time on this beyond what they actually have. Again, there's no inherent goodness or inherent badness, but things will still appear good or bad, as we're going to talk about a little later tonight, on the basis of our karma. I've already used these examples before. I used the example of music, I think, as well as we can talk about any of the sense objects, how we all have certain things that we are attracted to, that we appreciate the karmic appearance that we're kind of working with. You know, the deliciousness of certain food or the delightful sounds of particular music and so on. And then we have on the opposite side things that are not so attractive to us, the foods that we don't like the taste of, that we would spit out if we accidentally ate them, or the food that, or the music that we find very unpleasant, that doesn't really, kind of do it for us and actually can be annoying for us. Now, again, what the minds of desire or lust or attachment, whatever, and hatred, anger, aversion, what they do is they exaggerate the kind of karmic appearance of that object to you, the goodness of the delicious food and the badness of the unpleasant food, and they elevate it to a degree where we see it entirely as good. We kind of completely coat the object with an inherent goodness, and we completely coat over here everything with an inherent badness or unpleasantness. We don't see the variety of facets, and we have elevated things to a degree that is far beyond what is there. There is something there because we are experiencing it, but it too is empty from its own side. It's a karmic appearance informed by all that. We're going to get into that later tonight. Why do we, again, have certain music that we find attractive that if we played for other people, they would go, oh, that's music. It's horrible. Can you take it off? I really can't stand it. Or we go to someone else's house and they say, oh, I just got this, just found this new music, and they put it on and you're listening to it and you go, I'm not so sure I like this music. And they're enjoying it immensely, but we're not having the same experience, right? Because there's no inherent goodness or badness. If we go back to, again, that slide, we just have to be careful when we have these words like this, superimposing qualities, good or bad, on phenomena beyond what they actually have. Well, they actually don't have anything inherently. Nonetheless, they are still a karmic appearance on the basis of causes and conditions that we are attracted to and find good, or that we find bad. But the minds of hatred and attachment elevate those qualities to a much larger degree. So we end up believing in those things and following them, and again, creating karma on the basis of that. For instance, when we get very angry at someone, we have a strong sense of the wretchedness of that person. But later, when we calm down and look at that same person, we may find our earlier perception laughable even. I mean, it is true. If we have that kind of ability to look back on it and go, why was I thinking the person was so evil and horrible and wretched and whatever. There's really a lot more to that person, and especially if this is somebody that we've already known, and we know that they have another facet to them. I talked about this a bit on the workshop on Saturday on equanimity, how we have to be aware that we're not seeing the whole picture at those times when we're having a mind of anger, hatred, aversion, or even the desire or the attachment that we occasionally have with friends and so on. Excuse me. The benefit of insight is that it prevents us from attributing to objects a goodness or badness beyond what is actually there. This undermining of self-deception makes it possible to reduce and eventually end our lust and hatred, since these emotions are built on exaggerations that, of course, are built on a fundamental misconception, which is that the objects exist inherently, or that the goodness or badness that they have kind of actually there exist from their own side. It's all a kind of house of cards that can be toppled on the basis of undermining the belief in inherent existence. And of course, the conceptions that follow from that. This elimination of unhealthy emotions in turn leaves more room for healthy emotions and virtues to develop. By viewing phenomena with insight, you bring them within the scope of the practice of emptiness. This is something we're going to talk about a little bit next week as well in the final class, where I'm mostly going to focus on how the teachings on emptiness as well as concentration can inform our lives and we can bring into our practice. But, having an awareness that the way things appear and the way they exist are contrary. We don't get so invested in things anymore. If we kind of understand, oh, this is just a dependent arising, various causes and conditions, my own karma that are causing me to have this unpleasant experience of this. Well, I don't need to be so attached to what I need or want at that point, because that's all coming from a false place of a false sense of I, and everything else being imputed in an incorrect way, rather than seeing things as they actually are. Again, it's the same sort of mindset that I was mentioning about the person who brings a lucid quality to their dreams. If you were aware in your dreams, and again, perhaps many of you have had that experience, then if something frightening is appearing in your dream, you don't get fearful, right? Because you know it's just a dream object. Very similar in regard to our waking life, though obviously there are differences. I'm not saying it's an exact thing, because once more, the Buddha never said that life is a dream. It's dream-like. It's illusory. It's things being similar to what we experience with illusions or dreams. There still is a level of reality to our waking life that is somewhat different than our dream life. In fact, they say that you don't create karma in a dream so strongly as you do in your waking life. Why? Because there are real objects in your waking life in a conventional sense. And we'll talk about that more later as well when we talk about conventional truths. The conventional world is still to be valued as something that exists. It just, again, doesn't exist in the way that it appears. Similar to our dream objects appearing to exist as real objects in line with our waking life, but they don't exist that way. All right, so it's always, again, this idea of appearance and reality. And when we bring that insight into our daily lives, again, as I was explaining just a few minutes ago, we don't get so caught up in things. Things don't draw us in so strongly. And this is, again, something we'll also touch on next week, but I like that it was in this section, so I thought I would share it on the screen. When you practice expanding love and compassion, keep in mind that love and compassion themselves and the persons who are their objects are also like a magician's illusions, in that they appear to exist solidly in and of themselves, but do not. Again, at no point do we say persons in the world and sentient beings don't exist at all, and love and compassion don't exist at all. They just don't exist in the way that they appear. Even these positive qualities, right? If you see them as inherently existent, His Holiness says, this view will keep you from fully developing love and compassion. And this is what we'll talk about next week too, because it's important that we inform our love and compassion through the lens of emptiness. That we see that uniting these two aspects of the wisdom aspect of emptiness and the method aspect that is primarily compassion and bodhicitta and so on, that these two need to be practiced in tandem. And we'll talk about that more next week. Instead, view them as like illusions, existing one way but appearing another. This perspective will deepen both your insight into emptiness and the healthy emotions of love and compassion, so that you can an effective, compassionate activity. So this is, again, I don't want to talk too much about it tonight because we will get into it next week and we got a fair amount of stuff to still go through. But these two wings of a bird, as I've alluded to them before, the wing of wisdom, the wing of compassion, we need to unite these and have them complement each other. Get into the next module of Discovering Buddhism, module 13 on Tantra. And there they have an even more profound way of bringing these two sides of the path together through the practices that are taught in highest yoga tantra or other forms of tantra to some degree as well. But the idea is that we need to make sure that both aspects reinforce and support each other, that we don't kind of go off on a tangent thinking everything, other sentient beings are compassion, everything else, all the good qualities are all real from their own side, when that's not true according to the wisdom side. Otherwise, you end up kind of with this imbalance. You want your wisdom to complement what's being generated on the method side, and then what you're learning from the method side to strengthen your wisdom wing. So these two become things that work in tandem. And we'll talk about that a bit next week with the teachings that His Holiness goes through in the latter part of the book. Let's go on to talk a little bit then about how everything depends on thought. This was a particular section of the book that was really quite interesting. And I'll have to admit, we're going to get into a little bit of the deep end here with some of what we're going to be looking at. And if you've read this chapter, I think it was two chapters, 19 and 20, that pertain to tonight's teaching. Perhaps you've already seen a little bit of this and going to see what is happening. We're going to talk about this thing called the snake rope example or analogy. Sometimes it's used. It's on pages 186 through 187. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from that. It's a particular passage from Lama Tsongkhapa. Remember, Lama Tsongkhapa was one of our three great masters that we talked about in the first class that we depend upon for our understanding of emptiness in this tradition. Lama Tsongkhapa says, and this is on page 186. First, I'll precede it with what His Holiness says just before this. He says, when I was about 35 years old, I was reflecting on the meaning of a passage by Tsongkhapa about how the I cannot be found either within or separate from the mind-body complex, and how the I depends for its existence on conceptuality. And what we've talked about both of these concepts already, right? In terms of the last week, the 4-point analysis where we cannot find the I to be either within or separate from the mind-body complex. And then in the previous teaching, how the I depends for its existence on conceptuality, designation, imputation, this mind that is imputing the existence of that phenomenon. So he says here, this is what Tsongkhapa says, a coiled rope's speckled color and coiled form are similar to those of a snake, and when the rope is perceived in a dim area, the thought arises, this is a snake. So I'll have a little visual aid to help you here with this, and maybe I'll keep this on the screen as I continue to read this part. I couldn't find anything that was exactly similar, but imagine on the left that that's in a dim lit area of like your yard or patio or garage or somewhere, and you didn't even know that the rope was there, and suddenly you see something. And due to the dimness of the light, you have that moment where you think it's a snake. I mean, in New Mexico, we have these guys, right? I see people posting on Nextdoor about, out in El Dorado and how they're finding, rattlesnakes in their yards in the summer and what have you. So again, you have this perception of the rope in a dim area, and the thought arises, this is a snake. As for the rope, at that time when it is seen to be a snake, the collection and parts of the rope are not even in the slightest way a snake. Therefore, that snake is merely set up by conceptuality, this kind of fake snake, false snake, that we are imputing on rope, which has none of the qualities that the basis of snake have. It's a false imputation in terms of saying snake on the basis of that coiled rope that is in the corner of the dim room or whatever dim area. In the same way, when the thought I arises in dependence upon mind and body, nothing within mind and body, neither the collection that is a continuum of earlier and later moments, nor the collection of the parts at one time, nor the separate parts, nor the continuum of any of the separate parts, is in even the slightest way the I. Also, there is not even the slightest something that is a different entity from mind and body that is apprehendable as the I. Consequently, the I is merely set up by conceptuality in dependence upon mind and body. It is not established by way of its own entity. Now, I'm going to share a little bit more of another writer's work on the same concept, because we need to go to the other side of the analogy too, which is saying that when we first were talking about it, based on what Tsongkhapa said, he's saying that when this rope appears to you and we falsely designate snake to it, that there's nothing that is snake from the side of the basis, right? In the same way that there is nothing that is I on the basis of trying to find this inherently existent I on this collection of stuff. There's no real I here. Again, we've done that analysis. We know that that's not findable. The kind of really clever thing about this analogy is that Tsongkhapa goes on to say, and the analogy goes on, this example, that it's similar with regard to what was on the other side of the screen, that we properly designate as a snake. Just like there is no real I on the basis of this fine designation for an I, this collection of body and mind that we designate as I, there is nothing that is a snake on the side of those parts of a snake that are correctly identified as a snake. So let me put that back on the screen. On the left, we kind of get it, right? That there's no real snake here because this is a mind that's very clear to us as something that is mistaken. All you have to do is turn on the light and get a flashlight and you point it at the coiled rope and you see that it doesn't actually have the attributes, the qualities that we identify a snake as having, correct? But on the right-hand side of the screen, there's also not a real snake there either. And it's equally devoid of snakeness on the parts that are appearing to you. So there's no real snake in either case. Obviously a big difference, right? That's what I want to show you in terms of the way that Guy Newland, in a book that is a little more advanced, perhaps, for this discovering Buddhism in some places, a book called Introduction to Emptiness in Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path. It's like a kind of heavy-duty book on emptiness to some degree. But he goes about a really nice explanation of this. So let me go ahead and get this started, and then we'll take a break, and we might have to come back and finish things. But he says, here is the example that Tsongkhapa uses. I'm going to go through this rather quickly because we just covered this. In the twilight, someone sees a rope and mistakes it for a snake. Suppose we leave aside anything we might know about the perspective of the person who sees the snake. Instead, we ask about what the snake is like on its own terms. This is absurd, right? We cannot begin to discuss the features of the snake because, in fact, there is no actual snake there at all, right? And we all get it with regard to the coiled rope. There's no actual snake there at all, right? There's nothing that we would identify as snake. It was a false imputation on the basis of various causes and conditions. Analogously, suppose we leave aside any consideration of how people and cars and tables appear to ordinary, valid, conventional consciousnesses and ask, how do these things exist from their own side? What are they like in and of themselves? There's nothing that is purely objective, nothing out there completely apart from mind that we can pin down and point out. This is what this analogy, this example is getting to. Is that we once more have an appearance as if the things have their own inherent qualities, their own inherent identity. And they do not possess that at all, similar to the way that a coiled rope does not have snakeness at all. And that's pretty far we have to go to. Again, the middle way view, even though we've been working with the concepts that help us to discern it through dependent arising and coming to see emptiness through this 4-point analysis, we still have this false appearance we have to struggle with and the conviction that we have in that. because we've had that since beginningless time. We've believed in things in the way they appear. And so we think that there's got to be something from the side of that basis that is what we're identifying it as, that sets itself up as that. It's kind of hard to take it all the way to the point that Tsongkhapa is making. That just as there's nothing on the basis of the rope that makes it a snake, there is nothing on the basis of the coiled body that we correctly identify as snake that makes it a snake. There's nothing inherently there. Yes, we can identify characteristics that we are also imputing, such as the tubular body and the markings and the kind of a what would you call it, triangular shaped head, the tongue, all the various things that we identify. Those are all conceptual designations too, right? Everything is conceptually designated. We have to get to this place of not accepting the appearance of things as real from their own side, but coming to understand that they have no reality from their own side as what we've designated them as. Nonetheless, they exist as conventionalities. They exist in a conventional way through our mere designation, as well as, again, through their parts, dependence upon that, as well as dependence upon causes and conditions, all of which are merely imputed as well. So it's a big kind of, again, there's nothing really substantial holding it all together. It's all being imputed by our minds on the basis of our conventional agreement about things. And we're going to get into that with the two truths shortly. You do just a little bit more and then we'll take a little break here, he says. Unlike the hallucinated snake, these people and cars do exist, right? Because we wouldn't say that the rope is an actual snake in our conventional terms, right? That's fair. But people and cars and whatever else that we designate correctly, they do not exist at all on their own, but they do exist. However, they do not present their lack of independent existence to our senses. Instead, they appear as though they were established on their own out there. And this is, I think, one of the biggest difficulties that we have is if things didn't appear this way, it would be quite easy to refute that are holding to them that way. And just in the same way that if you had somebody who said, "Oh, honey, I think there's a snake out in the garage," or whatever, and then you went out there because they saw this coiled rope, it's quite easy to refute that coiled rope as being a snake, right? Because the false appearance is overcome quite quickly. Turn on the lights, shine the flashlight in the corner. You suddenly see that this is a coiled rope. It's not a snake at all. It doesn't have the proper basis for a snake, right? It's not like that, though. Again, even in these great bodhisattvas that I was talking about who go into this meditation on emptiness, they realize it very profoundly. They come out and things still appear to be real. It takes all the way till Buddhahood for you to remove that false appearance. But of course, what we're trying to do is weaken that in terms of our conviction in it. Yeah. So that's why, again, what we do with these 3 steps that I mentioned earlier, things appear, we kind of give them a label. There's a basis that appears that we label correctly according to our conventional awareness. Secondly, it appears to be real from its own side. And thirdly, we agree to that, we assent to that, we believe in that. This is what we have to remove first. Stop believing in it. You know? We're putting too much on objects that they don't have at all. We have to stop believing in it. Eventually, we will get to a place where that appearance disappears when we have that direct realization. But even when you come out, like I've been saying, you still have that false appearance. You don't get rid of that till Buddhahood. And then you come to, again, full awareness of things as they actually exist, that all conventional things exist as mere designations, mere imputations. And all those things are empty of inherent existence. They all are together with their emptiness. This is, again, what we're going to be talking about in terms of the two truths. I think let's take a little, let me go back to this. Whoops. Yeah, let me just, let me stop for a minute, because otherwise I feel like I'm going to just keep going and it'll be hard to take a break. It's about 8:05 here in Santa Fe, so let's take about just 5 minutes or so, because we do have a fair amount of material to cover, and I think 5 is plenty just to have a little stretch break, especially those who've been sitting still for a while. So take 5 minutes and we'll resume. Okay. Let me carry on now. Again, we're in this whole topic of how there is this false appearance of things existing from their own side, and yet, again, trying to put this together in these two sides, the emptiness of phenomena and this very subtle way in which they exist, kind of understanding that these two come together. This is going to lead us right into the whole topic of the two truths. So let me revisit the one that I had here before. So again, things do exist. They do not present their lack of independent existence to our senses. Instead, they look like they're established on their own out there. That's again that false appearance. And everything that appears to us outside of this deep meditative equipoise on emptiness that these superior beings have, everything appears to exist from its own side. The delusion that is the root of cyclic existence involves seeing things, again, particularly ourselves. That's the one that Chandrakirti identified as being the main root of all of our problems. The root of that tree of ignorance or tree of samsara is clinging to ourselves, our own personal identity as having the inherent existence. So he says that the root is involves seeing things as having just this sort of objective and autonomous being. This delusion sees things as being set up from their own side as having their own natural way to be there. Again, it's just, as I said earlier, it's like we will come into the world and we think everything is established as what it is on its own. It's up to us to figure out what it is and to learn the labels for what it is, but we think it has its own identity, having their own phrase that's used here, natural way to be there. Tsongkhapa says that this ignorant mind apprehends each phenomenon as having a manner of being such that it can be understood in and of itself without being posited through the force of a conventional consciousness. And having an ability to stand completely on its own, in and of itself, without a conventional consciousness being involved in establishing it at all. Things to be seem to be existing independent of thought, independent of imputation, independent of designation. We usually suppose that the world is already and always fully real, independent of our minds, out there, waiting to be revealed by the searchlight of consciousness. Just what I was talking about. In fact, our minds are actually collaborating in the creation of the world, moment by moment. It's kind of interesting. Some of these, if you do have the opportunity later in your studies after discovering Buddhism to go on to some of the basic program courses, for example, or what have you, and you look at kind of these different tenet systems, they're called philosophical points of view, how there's different kind of powers given to the mind in some of these schools in terms of many of them at the lower level adhere to some objective existence and thinking that things are sort of equally posited to some degree. And then you start giving more and more power to the mind. And when you get to Prasangika Madhyamaka, again, this consequence middle way school that we're studying, it's pretty much 100% from the side of the mind. Now, we're not saying that there's no objective reality at all. What we're saying, though, is that that only plays a very small role in terms of what exists, because it's our mind imputing the existence of book and chair and person and table and I and whatever. All of these things don't have any objective existence at all. The kind of power comes entirely into the consciousness, the mind that is designating and imputing. So it's pretty profound when you start to investigating the way that the Buddha taught kind of very skillful ways to keep us moving in that direction of eventually getting to a place where we see, as it says here, our minds are actually collaborating in the creation of the world, moment by moment. We create it through the force of our thought. This does not mean that hallucinated snakes have the same status as people in cars and tables. Snakes falsely imputed to be ropes do not in fact exist, while tables and people do exist because they have a valid conventional existence. This is a vitally important distinction. By the way, I attributed that to His Holiness. We're in the Guy Newland section here. Sorry, it's Guy Newland who was saying this. So again, things do have a difference in terms of this false appearance and things, that are falsely imputed by our consciousness, such as the snake imputed to the rope, doesn't have the same status as a table or a person, or even a snake that is correctly imputed to the body of a snake, right? Because they do have valid and conventional existence. And this is important to make a distinction. So we're not just saying that we make up our world willy-nilly, but we make it up on the basis of those things that kind of have an accordance, that work in complementary to the way we are conceiving of them, the way that we are going to label them and work with them in terms of the functions that they have and so on. Suppose I very much want gold, he says. I may see a rainbow, and affected by my desire for gold, and of course by my misconception that there's gold at the end of the rainbow, I think, over there, I will find a pot of gold. This is rather in the nature of seeing a rope and out of fear believing it is a snake. There's no snake. There's no gold in those places at all, right? We're kind of taking a complete false basis and thinking that there's something there that isn't there. But there is a rope, there is a rainbow. Oops, sorry. These things exist conventionally. We can appropriately impute them, saying, there it is, they function. And we still can give functionality to something else, like just when you do find that that isn't a snake, it's actually a rope. Well, but then you see there's a rope. You can give a proper designation to what is there. So we can see that things do exist conventionally, and we never refute their mere existence in that way. So we can recognize that this idea, Guy Newland says, that things depend upon minds does not in any way destroy conventional existence. At the same time, it is definitely not just another way of talking about what we already know. It does not leave our usual sense of the world unscathed. This is the import of all of this. Again, I'm using Guy Newland's book. It is a little more advanced, but the whole concept behind this is if we start to see the import of these things, the import of the fact that things do not have any inherent existence. They don't exist from their own side, yet they appear that way. And when we come to understand that's false, well, it completely undermines our way of grasping at reality and thinking things do have that, and then building our whole life on the basis of that, the real I that needs to acquire these real things for my real happiness. All of these things become deflated in terms of their importance because there's no real I at the center of all of it, nor do any of these things exist in the way that they appear. And it doesn't mean they don't exist at all, because they do, but they're existing in a very subtle way. Remember that phrase I shared with you last week? It's almost as if they don't exist, Rinpoche would say. It's almost as if they don't exist. There's just enough for mere existence, nominal existence, purely through a name on a basis that we agree is suitable for that name, suitable for that designation, that conception. He goes on back to the snake example. To take the snake example, when a person sees a rope and imagines a snake, there's no snake at all in the rope. But even when, this is what I mentioned earlier, and I like how he emphasizes this, even when there actually is a snake, conventionally, and we perceive a snake, the snake as we perceive it is also completely absent. It is just as non-existent as the rope snake. This is profound and important to reflect upon. And I'm not sure, again, everyone's getting the profundity of it. That's okay if you don't. If you're kind of scratching your head and saying, well, I'm not sure I'm there, that's okay. I mean, this is all just to plant some seeds, give you some feeling for the extensive implications and consequences of emptiness. That if things don't exist from their own side, then in the same way that, as it says here, on the basis of that coiled body that has the head at the end and the fangs and the tongue and the nose and everything that we kind of have as the parts of that, if on the basis of that there's no snake from that basis, we also get, of course, then that there's no I on this collection of stuff that we designate as mind and body, and that we impute on that collection the sense of I. There's no real I here. There's no real snake there. There's no real anything there. And I use real again in the context of having inherent existence. It does have some level of reality. That's what we're going to come back around to with the two truths, is to understand that we still can posit it as a truth in a way, not absolute truth, because it isn't true when it comes down to it, because it's a falsity. It doesn't exist in the way that it appears. The way that that snake body seems to have snakeness all over it, from the tip of the tongue down to the tip of the tail. It seems to have its snakeness, and this seems to have its I-ness from the top of our heads to the bottom of our feet, everything in between. There's no real I here. There's no real snake there. We have to, again, get to the profundity of it in time to really understand that this is what it's getting us towards, is to really see the implication in our lives. It doesn't mean you don't respect the snake that you're conventionally calling a snake. Stay away from it. Don't let it bite you and damage your body or what have you. But see that it's falsely appearing. As we perceive it, Guy Newland says, the snake is inherently existent. It appears to our minds as something objectively real, existing in and of itself. Such a snake does not exist at all right now, and it never could exist. And we're not negating something that actually was existing and making it not existing. We've been falsely thinking it's existing, and it's never existed that way. We think that there are real snakes and real I and real tables and real chairs and real cars and real people, whatever. Thus, when we feel that Tsongkhapa's emphatic validation of conventional reality is pulling us too far in the direction of affirming the ordinary way that things appear, we can recall snakes and ropes are equally devoid of the kind of snakes I perceive, believe in, and fear. We kind of get to that place of understanding that there's a falsity to everything that is appearing to us. Don't cling too tightly to conventional reality. Conventional reality does exist, but it doesn't exist in the way it appears at all. All right? Okay. I may have put too many slides on this, but it's going to come to an end shortly. Just hang in there. Tables are utterly devoid of the kind of table that I believe in. People exist, but people, just as I now conceive of them, have never and could never exist, even to the slightest degree. And we kind of have to keep that as our overriding message, that we get to a place where we understand that the way things have always existed is being empty of inherent existence. And they function just fine. Everything has functioned in the world. We're never denying its conventional reality, its ability to function as a snake, as a person, whatever. Just how do they exist? Okay, so there is a little passage that I want to go into just a little bit. It's on page 189 of your book. That kind of is another key point in this whole section of how everything depends upon thought. All right, page 189, the paragraph, second paragraph in the exploring the meaning. His Holiness says, indeed, external objects are part of the process of generating consciousness of them, as in the case of seeing a tree and its surroundings. But if dependence on thought meant that a conceptual thought is needed to construct everything we see, this would be absurd. In other words, what His Holiness is getting at here is saying that it's not like through the force of our mind, the physical matter that we call a tree comes into existence. There is that external basis that is designated as a tree. We're not giving, and this is where, again, it's pretty close to 100% power to the mind, but there still has to be a basis. I can't say there's a tree here in the Gompa because there's no tree, right? There's no basis for a tree. We don't have what we would conventionally designate as a tree. So there is some external reality that isn't in the sense of like our mind creating it, but nonetheless, our mind identifies it, gives it its identity, designates it as a tree. So His Holiness carries on. He says here, therefore, it seems to me that in the end, the meaning of the worlds being established by conceptual thought is that objects, without depending on a consciousness, cannot essablish their existence right within themselves. In other words, they need a consciousness to kind of designate what they are. This is totally contrary to what we were talking about earlier, right? That is kind of our default mode. We come into the world and think that everything is set up as what it is, and it's our job to correctly identify it. in a sense, to come to know the treeness of the tree. You know, what's that phrase from Shakespeare? A rose by any other name is still a rose. That's kind of inherent existence in a sense. Seeming to think that it has its roseness by any other name. It's still a rose. It still is that essential thing identified from its own side. That's the false way that we are kind of believing in the world around us, having that inherent existence as well as ourselves and so on. What His Holiness is saying here is that the meaning of being established by conceptual thought is that these objects, such as what we designate as a rose or a tree or an eye, what have you, without depending on a consciousness, cannot establish their existence right within themselves. They don't have the ability to set themselves up as tree or rose or person, eye, right? So what we're getting at is like the onus falls on the consciousness that is giving the identity to that basis. The basis is still there. It's not kind of conjured up by consciousness in a way. There is a basis. There is this reality of this external world that we're relating with and identifying and organizing and what have you. But we seem to think like it's from the side of the object, and it's totally opposite. It's from the side of thought, of designation, of conceptualization, that these things are brought into existence as what we identify them as. Okay? From this viewpoint, it is said that the world, all phenomena, both persons and things, is set up by conceptual thought. This is what we really mean by this concept of conceptual thought, things being merely designated, merely imputed. Again, because I think it is important that we understand that it's not like we're saying that the mind has the ability to conjure up these things without some physical basis being there, because those physical bases we can see come into their existence through various causes and conditions. You know, how a tree arises from a seed that gives, you know, it becomes a sprout and a sapling and eventually, you know, a whole tree and what have you. All these things do exist as a basis, but how they are known as a tree is from the side of our minds, from the side of our thoughts, designating that as tree, and conventionally agreeing that we're going to call this thing tree, or whatever, again, the label is that was given in various languages. All right. Okay, I wanted to share that passage. And I want to share one more little passage. Whoops, was that the one? Being established by concept. I think I've got the wrong page number for this one, because this is not on page 189. I'm going to have to change this before Michael kindly sends these slides out there. This is on page so it says here, this is at the end, page 196. I'll change that. Again, this is a passage on how the realization of being established by conceptual thought helps in identifying the object of negation, inherent existence. I think this is a kind of a nice way to come back around to what we started off talking about, that what we are trying to get rid of is the fundamental ignorance that is grasping at inherent existence. So what I just talked about, what I just shared about His Holiness saying that everything is dependent upon thought, it has no ability to set itself up objectively from its own side. On page 196, His Holiness says, this is why Buddhist scriptures say that the I and other phenomena exist only through the power of conceptual thought. Although the I is set up in dependence upon mind and body are not the I, nor is the I mind and body. Once more, they are two different phenomena, I, mind and body. There is nothing in the mind and body, in dependence upon which the I is set up, that is the I. Hence, the I depends on conceptual thought. It and all other phenomena are only set up by the mind. When you understand this, you get a little idea that persons do not exist in and of themselves and are only dependently established. And when you see that phenomena usually do not seem to be under the influence of conceptuality, but rather seem to exist in their own right, you will think, that is what is being refuted. That is what is being negated. So what's important about this understanding, and why I'm belaboring this to some degree, because we've talked about this for almost an hour now, how everything depends upon thought, is that if we really get the import of this, we see very clearly the object of negation, which is things not depending upon thought, existing independent of thought, independent of conceptualization, independent of our labeling them. It's another way to talk about the real I, the inherently existent I, the intrinsically existent I, the I that exists by way of its own character, by way of its own characteristics. All of these ways that we can talk about this object of negation, we get a feeling for it when we come to understand, again, the very subtle way that things do exist. Independence upon thought, designation, imputation. Okay. So hang on to your questions. There might be some questions on the basis of this. I'm going to spend a little bit of the remaining time we have, and I hope to finish going through the remaining topics, karma and emptiness, and then, of course, the two truths. Because you may come to that realization or that question that you have, well, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. Okay, so it's dependent upon my mind, but isn't there something that causes it to have a particular kind of experience of that object, if you will? I mean, what is informing that? How do we know things as what they are? I mean, again, if they don't have anything from their own side, what causes a particular appearance to arise to us? I was talking earlier about the good and the bad music or whatever, right? What causes you to have a particular type of music that you find very attractive? It's a karmic conditioning. It's due to various causes that we have put into place that cause us to be attracted to particular things in our lives, particular pleasing forms, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, whatever, all these various sense objects. They're informed by our karma. And again, not just the goodness or badness of various phenomena, but even what they appear to us as to some degree. So I'm going to share a little passage from one of the books that is on your book list, but I mentioned earlier when we went through the book list that it's kind of another heavy duty one for you to maybe look at after you've studied emptiness for a while, but I want to make sure to mention it. It's called Insight into Emptiness by Kensur Jampa Tekchuk, who I had the honor of getting some teachings from. I didn't study with him as extensively as what I would have liked, but pretty amazing teacher. And this book is a summary of his teachings on emptiness. So to aid in our efforts in understanding the view of the Prasangika Madhyamaka school, let us examine the traditional example of a god, one of these desire realm gods who has this pretty incredible karma, much better than a human in terms of their pleasures and what they experience. A human being, you're familiar with that, and a hungry ghost, which is an unfortunate state of rebirth where you have great obstacles to receiving food and nourishment, drink, what have you. All three of these beings are looking at a glass filled with fluid, okay? Each of these beings in the past has accumulated a certain type of powerful karma, leading to their present rebirth. Due to this, the god will see the fluid as ambrosia, a kind of nectar, which is only known by those in the god realm and tasted by them, The hungry ghost will see it as pus and blood. They say it has this really horrific appearance to hungry ghosts, so that it's really a repulsive substance. And the human being will see it as water, because of course this is the fluid that we have most commonly in this world, is our water that we have as the basis for so many of the other, drinks that we enjoy and so on, tea, coffee, juice, what have you, right? The three different appearances to those three different beings are all valid. There doesn't have to be something from the side of the object that makes it ambrosia, pus and blood, or water. If the fluid were ambrosia from its own side, then the human and the hungry ghost would also see it that way, right? Just like if the beautiful music was beautiful from its own side, everyone would hear it as beautiful, or everyone would enjoy the same taste of certain foods and find others disgusting because they're, enjoyable and disgusting from their own side. If it were pus and blood from the side of the object, on the other hand, all three beings would be equally disgusted by it, because even the hungry ghosts are disgusted by it, right? If it were water from its own side, which is what it appears to the human, then the god, the human, and the hungry ghosts would all experience it as such, but they don't. Since they don't, there is no ambrosia, no pus and blood, and no water from the side of the fluid. This is a classic example that's used, and it's a little mind-bending in terms of like we have this, what we see as a glass of water, and if you imagine these two other beings are here in the room and they partake of it, even the way it appears to them before they partake of it, they will experience it according to their own karma. We experience it as water because that informs our human experience. That's the karma that we have generated to be born in the human realm, to have certain things have a particular appearance, right? But there's no water from the side of that fluid, or all beings would have the same experience of that fluid. There's no ambrosia, again, from the side of that fluid, or we would all experience it that way. No pus and blood. Different karmas relating to a base that has nothing from the side of that base determining what it is. Rather, it is a karmic appearance. And it gives once more another dimension of understanding how things appear to us. And even having that understanding, and Kensur Jampa Tekchak doesn't talk about this, but that can also be a way to undermine some of our attachment or some of our repulsion and aversion towards those things that we don't find so attractive, right? We recognize that these are just karmic appearances. Our own karma has informed the way that we are particularly relating to things as pleasant, enjoyable, what have you. And that's not something set from the side of the object. Just like I was talking about on Saturday with the equanimity meditations, right? We tend to think there's something inherently there that is a friend. All the qualities that we see that are wonderful and delightful, that we enjoy hanging around with them. Not everybody sees that person the same way. For some people, that's the least desirable person that they would ever want to hang out with, right? They don't want anything to do with them. They don't like their qualities. They don't like their personality, what have you. And we think that they're just enjoyable, right? There's no reality from the side of the object. And karma is one of the causal factors that informs how we experience the world around us. And it's not doing it in an inherent way. If it was inherent, then what appeared as water to us would appear as water to every being, regardless of their karma. And all the other beings, of course, don't have inherent experiences of those glasses of fluid that they enjoy or don't enjoy, in the case of the hungry ghost, because it doesn't exist from that side. So, Kensur Jampa Tekchok says, this is an example that those of us who have not realized emptiness can understand in order to understand this prasangika view. Due to his karma, the glass of fluid appears as ambrosia to that god. The god imputes ambrosia on it, and it exists and functions as ambrosia for that god. Again, these are kind of like the initial steps that Rinpoche talks about, right? Something appears, there's an imputation of ambrosia, and it exists and functions as ambrosia for that god. And of course, there's a false appearance of ambrosia being from the side of the object and an adherence to that. As long as you're in this category that he's talking about, have not realized emptiness. We are kind of subject to the push and pull of our various karmic appearances. That same glass of fluid appears as pus and blood to the hungry ghost, is labeled pus and blood by that being, and functions as pus and blood for the hungry ghost. That's the power of the karma, that causal impetus that gives rise to a particular appearance that is imputed correctly as pus and blood, and then functions that way for the hungry ghost. Similarly, for us human beings, he says, due to our karma, it appears to us as water. Well, we call it water. I think that I copied these over from the Kindle, so that must be an error in the Kindle edition. We call it water, and it functions as water for us. Okay. So again, the object does not have any inherent existence. Karma is a major factor, a causal factor that informs the way that we experience our world. Okay, I know this gets into another concept that we perhaps haven't been exposed to so much. And as I said, it's not really in His Holiness's book as a major topic or anything. It's sort of behind the scenes. But this is giving credence to and equal value to these conventional factors. Karma is a conventional phenomenon, right? It's not an emptiness. Karma is empty, but karma itself is this functioning thing that is all the actions that we do that inform our experiences. Those cause particular appearances to arise for us that we label as particular things, and they function as that for us, right? This is how the world is actually kind of created. The samsaric existence is through the force of our karma, giving rise to particular experiences of various phenomena. But those phenomena having no existence from their own side again, or everyone would see it exactly the same way. Everyone would love Brussels sprouts, and everyone would, disdain, whatever kind of music you don't like. I don't want to throw any labels out there. Perhaps I might offend someone based on my own tastes. But the idea is that, this is what informs what we are experiencing, but it doesn't give the identity to it. It once more just gives that kind of raw material that then is interpreted through our conceptualization as being uh, classical music or pop music or rap music or whatever. All these various things don't exist from their own side. That was the third topic for tonight. The last one is to really go into the two truths, and then we'll see if there are any questions on this. Again, the two truths. Before I share this, I want to just mention, I don't know if I mentioned this in this class. I know I mentioned it once before, but in the pilot of the Exploring Buddhism program that is actually meant to come after Discovering Buddhism when it does get kind of standardized, and it will help people to prepare themselves for deeper study in the basic program. There's a whole module that is based on the way that His Holiness works with beginners even in teachings. Kind of interesting. He says when he teaches for an audience of people who are new to Buddhism, he often starts with, of course, having a compassionate motivation, but he goes right into the two truths. Why? Because the two truths are kind of the basis for understanding everything else that the Buddha taught. We kind of have these two foundational concepts that are underpinning everything in terms of understanding the way in which we are caught up in samsara, the Four Noble Truths, and so on, the way that we have the three jewels that we can rely on to help us on this path, and how our full development to Buddhahood can take place on the basis of these. So it's a very important topic that doesn't get a lot of due. There's a wonderful book by Guy Newland, the same person who wrote the book I was quoting from earlier, called The Two Truths. But again, it's pretty technical and pretty heavy duty. I think there's a new book on the two truths that's out there about from the various tenet systems, these philosophical systems I mentioned earlier. All of them teach the two truths and kind of give a different orientation towards them. But once more, it's in this prasangika madhyamaka, the consequence middle way school, that we see the two truths set out in their most profound and complete way. All right, so let's take a look at these and some quotes that kind of get us into the ballpark of talking about these because they very much are an extension of everything else we've talked about tonight. All right, first a quote from the Buddha from the Meeting of the Father and Son Sutra, as quoted by Jeffrey Hopkins in his book Meditation on Emptiness, which is again a very heavy duty book. Without depending on others, the knower of the world, that's the Buddha, taught these two truths, conventional and likewise ultimate. A third truth does not exist. All right? There is no third truth, just like there were no third possibility when we were doing our analysis, because they're essentially a dichotomy again. You have things that are conventional truths that appear to exist one way, but don't exist that way. They are kind of have a falsity to their appearance. And then you have the emptiness of those, the lack of that way of appearing. They don't exist in the way that they appear. The ultimate truth is their emptiness. There is nothing beyond that. There are either things that are deceptive or not deceptive. Because ultimate truth is completely not deceptive. It is seeing things in reality, seeing the absolute, the ultimate truth in regard to all phenomena. Whereas conventional truth is established together with some falsity, right? Because we talked about once more that process by which beings establish things. They establish them through mere convention, but again, they appear to be real. That's what we've been talking about so much tonight, that false appearance, and then the assenting to that appearance. Well, these phenomena appear to be real in this fictitious way, having their own existence from their own side, establishing themselves, inherently existent, appearing without depending upon thought, as we saw just a few minutes ago, but they don't exist that way at all. They are empty of that. That's the ultimate truth. So there's no third truth. The two truths are the building blocks of, if we go back to His Holiness's thing that he emphasizes, ultimate truth is the building blocks for the understanding of emptiness and the development of one's mind to be able to remove everything that obscures it and so on. The conventional truths are karma and all the other things that are merely designated but appear to be real. And those things are the building blocks of the side of method that helps you to kind of fly to the destination as well. You need both wings once more. I'm not going to go further with that whole thing, but essentially, both truths are the basis for the entire Buddhist path. And coming to a correct understanding of the two truths is really quite relevant to our practice, as His Holiness points out. When he teaches on this and starts with this topic, even again with beginners. So let's look at them in a very general way. These are not definitions per se that would hold up in a Tibetan Buddhist debate. These are just ways of describing the two truths. Conventional truth refers to how all conventional phenomena arise in dependence on various factors, the most subtle being their dependence upon mere imputation, designation. But conventional phenomena, again, we can't say that just anything anyone decides exists conventionally exists. It's not just pure imagination. Once more, there has to be a valid basis and a conventional agreement that this is what we're going to call chair and this is what we're going to call person and so on. And so again, it's not to say that things are just willy-nilly, I can posit whatever existing. There has to be a basis for it that we conventionally agree and that cannot be refuted through other conventional awarenesses or even through our more ultimate awarenesses. Because for someone to say, well, then doesn't inherent existence exist? Because conventionally we designate that, but it doesn't exist because it's refuted by our ultimate investigation, our investigation into whether inherent existence exists. And we, again, have already found that it doesn't. It can be refuted. The second one, ultimate truth, refers to the emptiness of conventional truths. That is, how they lack any independent, inherent, or intrinsic existence. Or again, as we saw a short while ago, any existence that is not merely imputed or designated or dependent upon thought. Again, that way of existing that appears to us and that is refuted through our analysis is what we mean, is what's, again, being the object of our ultimate truth, the emptiness, referring to the lack of that way of existing independently, inherently, intrinsically, on its own, independent of thought. So let's take a look at some examples. All existent phenomena are either conventional truths or ultimate truths. That's also what we mean by a dichotomy. There's no third truth. If it exists, it's either a conventional truth or an ultimate truth. So, table, that flat base that has 4 legs or sometimes 3 legs or sometimes maybe even more legs, right? It doesn't necessarily have a set quantity of legs. That phenomenon that we conventionally are designating as table exists with its ultimate truth, the emptiness of table. The I, the second phenomenon there, exists together with the emptiness of I. Form, as we see in the Heart Sutra, when we say form is empty, emptiness is form, what we are getting at with that is this mutual dependence of these two, that form exists together with the emptiness of form. There is no form that exists independent of emptiness, nor does the emptiness of form exist independent of form. These two exist in tandem. The phrase that is frequently used is that these two phenomena, the table and the emptiness of table, I, the emptiness of I, form, emptiness of form, and so on, all the various things that exist, these exist inextricably bound up together. I kind of call them being kind of the same entity. They are there together with any particular phenomenon. So again, when I hold up what we designate as book and the emptiness of book coexist and have always coexisted because we've given the label of book to it and it exists empty of any inherent existence. But of course, it doesn't, that's not how it appears. That's not how we grasp at it, but that's how it always has existed. Conventionally, we label book, we label chair, we label computer, we label I, we label everything in our world, and it exists together with its emptiness of existing independent of that or in any independent way, right? So this is what the two truths are. That's where, sometimes we think of emptiness in a very generic way, like emptiness is some big sea or something that everything is existing in. But it's not quite like that because everything that exists conventionally is together with its specific emptiness. My hand and the emptiness of hand coexisting on this basis. The label of hand given, and that's the subtlest way that hand exists, and then the emptiness of hand existing independently, existing on its own. These are the two truths. Now again, emptiness as well is empty of inherent existence. So it has a sort of conventional way of existing, but it's not a conventional truth because emptinesses are always ultimate truths. But nonetheless, the emptiness of emptiness does exist because emptiness is not existing independently. It exists also independence upon imputation, conceptualization, and so on. That's maybe another level of working with our emptiness teachings. We have to understand that if something exists, it's going to be one or the other. It's either going to be a conventional truth or an ultimate truth, and everything that exists conventionally is together with its own respective emptiness. So I'm going to just share a couple of quotes from a book, some commentary by Geshe Rabten on the Heart Sutra, when we talk about this phrase, a form is empty, emptiness is form. The two modes of being of form, its ultimate truth of being void of inherent existence, empty, and its conventional truth of being merely a mental imputation, are shown in these lines to be essentially identical, although they are conceptually distinct. Again, they are the same entity, but we can think about form in terms of how it is merely designated on a basis. And then we can also think about the emptiness of form that is an aspect of that form that is caught up in its lack of inherent existence, identifying that. So we have these two things coexisting, essentially identical, kind of having that same nature or essence, but conceptually we can think about them different. And this is how everything exists, is with these two truths, in a sense, bound up together inextricably. But yet they can be conceptually thought about, right? For someone who has gained genuine insight into this point, when perceiving form, or again, this was specifically the form aggregate that's being referred to in the Heart Sutra, when perceiving form or the body, he likewise understands it to be void of inherent existence. And when he contemplates the voidness or emptiness of form, he is fully aware of the fact that conventionally, form validly appears and functions. That's in essence the meaning of that, whole phrase of form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form is also not other than emptiness. These two coexist on everything that we can establish. We establish a person, a table, a chair, a horse, a cow, or whatever, and those phenomena are together with an emptiness, a lack of existing inherently. Again, that's how they've always existed. It's just our job to get to know that, to have the wisdom that discerns that knows that at a very deep level. So the Heart Sutra in that particular part is really emphasizing the compatibility of the two truths, the complementary nature of these two. That we're not talking about two things that are utterly, absolutely separate, but two things that are bound up in everything that exists. And we could kind of look at it as like two sides of a coin. It's appearing as, a person, a cow, whatever, and then it has the emptiness of that phenomenon. That emptiness is always together with it. If the cow ceases to exist, the emptiness of cow ceases to exist. The person ceases to exist, that person's emptiness ceases to exist. As long as that phenomenon exists, it coexists with its emptiness. These two, again, bound up together. I want to share, I mentioned Nagarjuna as one of the three beings. We've touched on all three tonight. We had a quote from the Buddha earlier. We have some from Tsongkhapa. and now we have something from Nagarjuna. Whatever is dependently originated, he says, that is explained to be emptiness. Form is emptiness. A form is our bodies are dependently originated. Remember, we even did the meditation on the dependent arising nature of the body. The body, that form is dependently originated. It's explained to be emptiness. In other words, emptiness is its nature together with its conventional nature as form or body. That, being a dependent designation, is itself the middle way. This is the middle way between those two extremes I talked about earlier. We can establish that things don't utterly have in no existence utterly or at all, nor do they have inherent existence. These are the two extremes of a sort of annihilation, thinking things don't exist at all, and thinking things exist in this more eternalistic, permanent way. Again, this is the middle way, understanding that dependent origination, dependent arising, means that things are empty. The fact that things are empty means that they must be dependently originated. And that's the middle way between these two. The very next verse of this chapter 24 in Nagarjuna's most famous text, that which is not dependently originated, such a thing does not exist. There is nothing that is not dependently originated, at least a lot of negatives in there. Therefore, that which is not empty, such a thing does not exist, right? Because if something is empty, it must be a dependent origination. If it's dependent origination, it must be empty. Well, then if there's nothing that is dependent origination, if there's nothing that is not a dependent origination, there is nothing that is not empty. All phenomena are empty. All phenomena are dependently existing, dependent originations. Okay. Just throwing those in there to give you a little taste of Nagarjuna and how he can sometimes be a little cryptic, right? If you were just to read these verses, without the context, you might go, "Oh my God, what is he talking about?" Maybe you have some understanding. Another way of looking at these two truths that I think is kind of interesting is some of these optical illusions that we have, right? Can everybody see how? I don't know what you saw first when you looked at it. Did you see a rabbit or did you see a duck? Saw a duck and then the rabbit. Okay. Other people might see the rabbit first and then the duck. But if you look at it in a particular way, you see a rabbit, and you look at it another way and you see a duck. This is kind of like the two truths, right? At least for us beings who are not Buddhas. If we get to a place where we start seeing the emptiness of things, we might kind of refute in some way their conventional existence. And when we see their conventional existence, we might still be refuting the emptiness of that object. And of course, for those beings who are on the path, they have a ways to go before they can really, hold both of those truths at the same time. But it is quite kind of interesting. Like if I focus on the duck, at least this is my experience, then I'm not seeing the rabbit, right? I mean, I can kind of get a shadow of the rabbit, but as soon as my eyes go to the rabbit part of it, then the duck has disappeared, right? And then when you see the duck, then the rabbit disappears. And this is sort of what it's like for those beings who are on the path and have not yet become a Buddha. But these two truths coexist, just like the rabbit and the duck on the same basis, right? That visual thing has the ability to be seen in two different ways. It's kind of another way of looking at it rather than two sides of a coin, but rather two things coexisting on that basis. The merely imputed designated conventional truth and the emptiness, the ultimate truth of that. All right, I don't have that much time. Sorry, I went right to the wire here, 8:59 here in Santa Fe. Anyone have a question or comment? It was a lot of information tonight. You did really well hanging in there with it. So, Josan, thank you for the thumbs up. Yeah, Benjamin, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay. I think a few weeks ago you said something like mind has always existed.
Mm-hmm.
And is it the mind that it then accumulates karma?
Mm-hmm. Well, we can say that the mind is the basis upon which the karma is accumulated, because it's certainly our mind that creates the karma through the thoughts and then the behaviors that come from that thought and so on. And we can sort of say that the mind is a temporary repository for the karma to some degree. I'm going to throw out what they say is the final answer to that question, though, which is a bit of a head scratcher, which is essentially in the Prasangika Niyamaka view, they say that the basis for karma is actually just the mere I, meaning the merely imputed I, which means that we don't need a kind of constant or substantially existent phenomenon. It's just that there is an I that is imputed to this collection of stuff that has the mind, the thread of the mind going through it without any beginning, without any end. And that collection of stuff that we think of as I, that's enough as a sort of repository or the way in which karma is carried and collected and goes from life to life. It's very, very subtle. It just means that essentially nothing more is required than the mere I. Because once more, that's how it always has existed. Is there's only been a mere I. There's never been more than a mere I. All of what we impute on top of that or conceive on top of that is fictitious. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but that's essentially what.
I would have guessed that the mere I would have been the last thing to accumulate karma, but it be something good for me to meditate on.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
there's always going to be there's always going to be a mere I that is imputed on a basis because mind is continuous. So anytime that mind is present, there's going to be a sense of a self that we are imputing to that mind and whatever physical embodiment we have. Just like ants and bees and mice and whatever, all these creatures in our world, snakes, all of them have a sense of I that is in relation to the consciousness that's together with that physical form. Again, it's very subtle for them, perhaps, in terms of how they are. It's not so complex as the way we look at ourselves and what have you through all of our conceptual thinking, but they still have a very kind of just a merely imputed I that acts as the basis for all of the continuity of that being and the karma that's collected. But of course, all the karma is collected generally for these beings on the basis of a false I that they are clinging to. We would say that those creatures, as well as all other beings, still have that ignorance that thinks that there's more than that. And that's why we're in the predicament that we're in. If we come to see it for what it is, then there's still the mere I in a sense as the Buddha, though a Buddha doesn't impute in the way that we do. There's no kind of conceptual movement of a Buddha's mind. But there still is the person that is now a Buddha. But of course, free from the shackles of all the karma that was accumulated according to the misconception of the I and so on. I don't know. And you had another point, perhaps, Benjamin, or
No, that's
another
it.
question? Okay, all right. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a hard one to kind of get because we kind of think there has to be once more something real there that is the carrier of all that karma and the creator of all that karma. But it's all created and carried just fine by the mere I, because that's all that's ever existed, folks. It's just a mere designation of I on this collection of stuff, which again happens quite naturally on the basis of different experiences, different embodiments. We think me in relation to a snake body, me in relation to a God body, me in relation to a hungry ghost body, me in relation to a human body. So I don't know if in the when discovering Buddhism was set up and they put this module together, whether they went to the depths of what we talked about tonight, but a lot of it was coming from His Holiness's book, and it's sort of the carryover, the consequences of what His Holiness talks about in those two chapters. And it might be good for this class in particular to go back and read those two chapters again if you haven't, to certainly read them, 19 and 20 in part 5, I think it is, that really help to, kind of put the conclusion to this to some degree. If there are these two things that we've been working with, because in the first reasoning, we looked at dependent arising mostly, which again is mostly conventional truth. And we looked at the 4-point analysis that's driving us to see ultimate truth. Then we see kind of how these two things come together. Now, everything depends on thought. And that means that anything more than that, that we think things don't depend on thought or hold them to have some sort of independence, that is what's being negated by ultimate truth, by emptiness. And these two, again, can exist completely complementary. Because that's the most important point to get to see the compatibility of the two truths, dependent arising and emptiness. See that they're pointing to the same thing, as was said in one of the slides earlier. Any other questions? So think about it. This is a lot of stuff to think about. You've got, again, I'll get to Michael. I'm sorry, I'm sometimes forgetting. I don't know why. I've got maybe a couple more things going on than what I need to have going on in my life. But I will work on the slides, getting them to Michael so he can get them out to you as soon as possible, or at least, at some point prior to the next class, so you can take a look at those and go back to the book, reread that. And there are some other readings that I think are quite nice that are complementary to what we've talked about tonight. I think there is an article on the two truths in the readings that you have for discovering Buddhism. Let's do our conclusion to tonight. And as we do this, try to reflect on emptiness even with our dedications, because again, our dedications should be done within the context of understanding that there are no inherently existent merits that we're dedicating. We ourselves are not inherently existent. Even when we become a Buddha, we will not be an inherently existent Buddha. Everything is merely designated, merely labeled. And we want to be able to dedicate all these merits within that view of emptiness so we can achieve the culmination of these two truths, these two wings that will result in our complete state of Buddhahood. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And we dedicate for the increase of the mind of bodhicitta, but also the mind of emptiness that we are working on as we recite this. Think that all of these realizations will continue to grow and develop and not decline in the least. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then as we recite this prayer for His Holiness, think that we're also including in our intentions all the other gurus that we have abiding with us in this world or wherever beings are benefiting from gurus. May those gurus continue to be there with good health and long lives, and may all their holy wishes be fulfilled. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then we'll do the prayer for Rinpoche for his swift return so we can benefit once more from his embodiment in this world, guiding us on our path. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Then lastly, as usual, just dedicate for whoever you're holding in your heart. We all have beings whose situation moves us at this time. Whatever experiences they're having of suffering, difficulty, send this positive energy out to those beings. Give it away completely and recognizing the emptiness of this. Don't cling to it in that way. Just recognize that this is a force by which conventionally we can achieve the state of Buddhahood by giving away all this merit to other beings, wishing for them to immediately be freed from their suffering through the force of this giving, and also for them to have all the causes and conditions that will lead them perfectly on their path to full awakening. And then extend that wish for all beings to benefit from what we've done here today in this same way. Be completely free from suffering and achieve their greatest well-being and happiness. Thank you all so much. We have one more class next Monday, and the main topic will be integrating these teachings into our lives, and maybe a little review if I've got time, but I've got a few topics to talk about in the context of that. And look forward to seeing you all then. All right, everyone, be well. Have a good week.
Thank you.